This is The World According to Jen and Carolyn.
Carolyn.
Hey, Jen.
How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
You know, I feel better than I sound. It's been a hell of a week. I got back from New Orleans on Monday, which was a fantastic trip made possible by Auntie Carolyn taking care of our child, Seed, whose birthday it is today.
He got us all sick.
I
could have gotten sick.
Or
from school,
who knows? Yeah. Around children. They'll fuck you up.
Cold.
Yeah. I thought I was in the clear. I was walking around my house like Howard Hughes in a mask and washing the skin off my hands. But my husband is a little more laissez-faire. So I think he got it, gave it to me. So we got a cold in New Orleans, but it's nothing Dayquil and bourbon can't fix. But, you know, it's been a tough week. And then last night was my 25th high school reunion, which was so much fun. We called it I called it because I made the flyer. I was on the planning committee, the Ratchet Reunion, because that's what it was. And it was at our local watering hole, Malloy's, which is in Colma, right across the street from a cemetery. It's very us, very South City. But yeah, so, you know, yelling over the DJ and smoking a joint with God knows what in it outside with one of my classmates.
I'm sure it was safe.
Yeah, we'll give you a voice like this. It was just weed for sure. But yeah, so this is why I sound this way.
I love when I have a voice like that. I think I sound sexy.
It's kind of sexy.
Yeah,
it's kind of hot.
Kind of fun until it like fades out.
Yeah.
And then I sound like I'm going through puberty.
Oh, yeah. Will you squeak a little bit?
Yeah.
So hopefully people find my voice sexy as I try my best to explain inflation today, because we're going to talk about whether or not what's going on right now is inflation or corporate greed, and really try to determine why so many of us Americans are on the struggle bus financially. So
is that what it's called? The struggle bus?
I love that term.
I've never heard
the struggle
that.
Bus. Really?
Well, I know I've heard like the bus system and like good to great, and like when it comes to like bringing in like good people into your organization, but I've never heard the struggle bus.
The struggle bus, baby. I'm on it today. And financially, I'm on it to an extent too. I am fortunate to be middle class and be in a much better position than so many of my fellow Americans. I really sound like I'm running for public office. My fellow Americans. Someday, guys. So, you know, I think from the grocery store to the gas station, average Americans are really feeling the pain, and we're suffering from what economists are calling the impact of inflation. So we're going to muddle through trying to define inflation for y'all. My husband should have listened or read this script because he used to teach econ, and examine how much inflation is really to blame for these rising costs of goods and how much corporations are to blame. So
what could it be?
Let's start, Carolyn. Carolyn, if I asked you to define inflation, could you do it?
Okay, here's my best guess.
Okay.
And I wrote this before I read our script and what we wrote. Is it when a product is like the product doesn't change, but the value of the price is based on demand?
Something like that. So, you know,
like milk and bread, and my parents used to talk about it a lot.
So I don't know if I could have done this prior to, but let's define it. Basically, inflation is the rate of increase in prices over a given period of time. Inflation is typically a broad measure, such as the overall increase in prices or the increase in the cost of living in a country. But it can also be more narrowly calculated for certain goods like food or services, such as a haircut, for example. Whatever the context, inflation represents how much more expensive the relevant set of goods and services has become over a certain period, most commonly over a year. And so when we're seeing the cost of a fucking dozen eggs go from $4 to $12.
That's crazy.
There's a lot of stuff at play.
Yeah.
I think there were some things going on in the egg industry and the chicken industry as well. But I think inflation, because those prices haven't gone down, they've gone down, but not that much. It still costs for a dozen organic eggs here in California. It's like $6.
Yeah.
So that's on sale.
And is that like the cost itself or the cost that's built in as well of getting it to the store?
Everything.
And the fuel. Okay.
So right now what's happening, and we'll get into this, the companies that are producing these goods are essentially saying, okay, well, the cost of raw materials and things have gone up so significantly that we have no choice, and paying wages have no choice but to pass these costs down to consumers. But really, how much is too much? So we're going to talk about that. So consumers' costs of living depends on the prices of many goods and services and the share of each in the household budget. So to measure the average consumer's cost of living, government agencies conduct what's called household surveys to identify a basket of commonly purchased items and track over time the cost of purchasing the items in that basket. So housing expenses, including rent and mortgages, constitute the largest component of the consumer basket in the United States. Now, theoretically, you should be paying no more than 30% of your income for your rent. In San Francisco, most of us aren't that fortunate.
Yeah.
We bought our house a long time ago. My husband bought the house. And I would say we're paying no more than 30%. But for the longest time, being extremely low income, I was paying way more than 30%. And I think a lot of us are in that situation. So to the extent that households' nominal income, which they receive in current money, does not increase as much as prices, they are worse off because they can afford to purchase less. So purchasing power. So in other words, their purchasing power is real. Inflation adjusted income falls. So if wages aren't going up,
right,
but the cost of things are going up, your money is not going to go as far. Even being middle class and having two incomes, we feel it.
Yeah.
Like I go to the store and I'm like, what the fuck did I just spend $100 on?
And it's like a bag of groceries. I always imagine each bag is $50.
Yeah.
But that's gone up more.
Yeah. It has. And we've made some changes, some adjustments in our lives where we buy our meat in bulk from Costco. It's just, they have tons of organic stuff and it's so much cheaper. And so we've made that adjustment. And
you're growing your own tomatoes.
I'm growing my own tomatoes. Oh shit. I got to put them in the sugo I'm making. The Sunday sauce is on the stove, y'all. I do need to eat them very soon. They look really good. So anyway, my husband was an econ teacher, not me, like I said, but we're going to do our best. So bear with us, okay? So what's causing current high inflation rates? This is from a CNBC Select article. Carolyn, any ideas?
I'll take wars overseas for 500.
Yeah, you're actually, this is what's being blamed as well, is what's happening particularly in Ukraine and the Middle East, as you posited, and you're correct. So, well, at least according to economists. So interview with Michael Gappin, head of the U.S. Economics Research at Bank of America. From this interview, he said the current high inflation rate can be attributed to many different factors, many of which are a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, this person says rising prices are based on three general causes: increases in household demand and supply chain shortages due to the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the presence of a strong labor market. Now, we're going to talk extensively about the third one. That one, me as someone who works in workforce development and local economic development, that makes me so angry. We'll get to the Phillips curve and how erroneous that shit is soon. So generally the story goes something like this, according to this dude. At the start of the pandemic, consumers began spending less because of lockdowns.
Yes.
And in turn started saving more. I was the opposite. I was like, let me go on Etsy and buy all this fucking jewelry.
Oh, I saved so much money.
But we saved money on gas. Yeah. Yeah, I did too.
Which was stupid.
Yeah, we were saving money on gas. We weren't going to restaurants.
I didn't have to pay. Well, I did have to pay office rent still.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
But we didn't have to pay for
loans.
Parking. Yeah, our loans were in forbearance.
I didn't drive my car for like a month or two.
This is why our environment improved exponentially.
Yeah.
And so it goes something like this. Start of the pandemic, as we said, people started spending less, saving more. What you did with that savings, up to you. Then when COVID-19 restrictions eased, people started spending more again. Companies, however, couldn't keep up with this increased consumer demand. Many of them had reduced production because of the pandemic and experienced shipping delays, as well as shortages in labor and key inputs. Also, 100%. Something interesting happened that they're not mentioning here. People were like, oh, I don't want to do shitty jobs for shit wages
that
anymore.
I'm not going to get sick time for either. And that's going to put my entire family at risk.
Yep. Yeah. And so certain industries started seeing people not return to work even when it was deemed safe to do so. So I don't know.
They didn't have childcare.
Yeah.
And their kids were home from school.
Exactly. And a lot of women ended up leaving the workforce because financially it just unfortunately made more sense.
Yeah.
So
it's a pretty weird time.
Very weird.
Unprecedented, I heard.
We still have not completely recovered from the effects of it.
Yeah.
So clearly, if inflation if it's still being blamed for inflation, right? So the result of all these things, higher prices for goods and services. Perhaps and most notably is Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as you said, and Western countries' resulting sanctions, which puts severe limits on the import of Russian oil. So
Oh, I was like, what were we importing from them?
Yeah.
Oh,
oil. They're one of the biggest oil producers in the world. I think they're second only. I think
come on, Alaska.
I know. I think we might be after Saudi Arabia and then it's them, or they're second. I can't remember, but they got a lot of oil. Who knows? They may be first. I don't know. So have you ever, Carolyn, heard of the Federal Reserve?
Yes.
Okay. So for folks who haven't, the U.S. central banking system, which is called the Federal Reserve or the Fed, is the most powerful economic institution in the U.S. and perhaps the world. Core responsibilities include setting interest rates, managing the money supply, and regulating financial markets.
The guy who's always
that was Ben Bernanke back in the day.
Oh, okay.
He was like Alan Greenspan was like the fucking rock star.
Yeah.
I used to have a friend who would get drunk. She was an econ major and she would just scream, when Alan Greenspan talks, people listen. I'm like, Jesus Christ, if I have to hear about fucking Alan Greenspan one more time, God damn it. So anyway, the Federal Reserve actually seeks to control inflation by influencing interest rates. When inflation is too high, the Fed typically raises interest rates to slow the economy and bring inflation down. This is what we're seeing. You know, you're not seeing when you buy a house, interest rates being at like 3-4% anymore. Now they're hovering around 7-8%. We also have to remember too, that during the time that our parents were buying houses, interest rates were like 18-19% or higher.
Yeah.
So we lived in kind of an unprecedented time where economists were saying that they were calling that the age of free money. The age of free money is over, right? Like I got a car that's only a few years old that was 0 down payment.
Wow.
0 down payment.
Wow.
And that's just how it was.
That was a time.
Yeah.
I forgot. God, we're getting
no down payment. And I don't know, we didn't have to put a down payment down. We traded in another car and then I don't think we have interest.
Now it's
almost
crazy.
Positive. Yeah.
How expensive it is.
It is
the
nuts.
Interest rates on cars.
Zero interest at one point. Not anymore. So when the central bank increases interest rates, borrowing becomes more expensive. Duh. And in this environment, both consumers and businesses might think twice about taking out loans for major purchases or investments. So this slows down spending, typically lowering overall demand and hopefully reducing inflation. So yeah, that was an answer I got from AI. So thank you, AI.
Well, that does make sense though. And this is all I was telling you before. Like, this is such a hard concept for me because I don't think in economic terms.
Yeah.
Clearly.
We like to spend. We don't understand the saving component as much.
Well, and even the way we do spend, I think, is very different than how I would have spent it how I spend it in my 20s and 30s.
Sure.
But this is very confusing.
Yeah, it is.
And I didn't learn any of this in school. And I didn't have to take econ.
Yeah.
Because in college, I didn't take classes. And so if you don't know this stuff, you're kind of by choice sort of ignorant to it.
Sure.
But I find it incredibly boring.
It can be, but it impacts all of us.
To me.
Yeah. I think it's a way of, hopefully people who feel similarly to you after this episode will be like, okay, Jen and Carolyn broke it down in a way that I can actually understand. And it's important that I understand this because this impacts me and my family on a daily fucking basis. So, and I took econ in high school and I learned nothing. Nothing. Oh God, Miss Tan. That was our teacher. She was, oh my God, I'm not going to go on a tangent right now, but wow, all of us, I'm surprised that didn't come up at the reunion.
Were any teachers at the reunion?
No.
That bums me out. I love when teachers come to stuff like that.
There are a couple that we wish had come that we extended invites to, but they're like, you youngsters. So look, whether you all get this or not, you probably do know what it feels like to not have your paycheck go as far as it used to. And that's really stressful for a lot of us. So this is from the New York Times. A recent poll conducted by the American Psychological Association found that more adults ranked inflation as the top source of stress than any other issue asked about in the poll's 15-year history. You can't turn the news off about money because you have to pay for food and gas, said Valley Wright, a psychologist and senior director at the association. So, yeah, and we just did the episode on fear, and financial fears were right at the goddamn top.
Yep. So,
Carolyn, talk to us a bit about the stress due to inflation and some common coping strategies that people have developed.
Well, and I think, from a personal note, this was a huge part of why I no longer could afford to commute to Marin.
Yeah.
To Half Moon Bay 3 times a week. And, I basically, later down along the line, made a choice to take a lower paying full-time job that allowed me to no longer rely on a car, which cut out about $300 expenses a month.
Yeah.
And with the gas prices that were going, I couldn't afford to go to work and make the income, and they couldn't afford to pay me more.
Yeah.
And I had to make choices that these are difficult things. And, again, it really hit me. And I think as well, so many, how much more relevant this was in the pandemic when all of a sudden the world and kind of just our own futures and so many different aspects were really fragile, and something that you felt very, I think sort of the government is this like parental sort of protector.
Well, maybe.
A really fucked up parent.
Yeah.
But, this is, it's a fragile system.
Yeah.
And the stress-induced coping that you were talking about, and this both not just the anticipation of scarcity, but the financial hardships that directly impact what's a real felt sense of safety and sort of continuity, that's real. And not just safety among others, but, safety amongst when you're watching friends, and you're watching family members, not have care, health insurance, not have care. There's a real sense of, that's your basic needs, housing, clean food, clean water. And again, even with that, still quite a lot of privilege over here in San Francisco and the Bay Area. But, most people deal with incredible anxiety, or they're going the opposite way with like the fuck it, let's live on credit, which is basically me in my 20s. I know you too.
Totally. Us too.
But then you come up with this worse feeling of sort of hopelessness and depression.
Yeah.
And, I'll take a step further. Big pharma comes in, and even many mental health resources have convinced us all that all we need is a pill for that. And the irony is that, we're never really reaching the root cause. And so you're absolutely right. According to the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, more than 3/4 of working aged adults in the United States experience stress due to inflation. And despite a declining national inflation rate in recent months, stress, and this was in February 2024, stress due to inflation has a significant increase among not just working age adults, but I think it gets worse as you age too. My 20s and 30s, I was like, I'll worry about that later.
Right.
It's later now.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, you have 20 years to really make a good income so that you can survive.
Yeah.
You might live to be past 100. You better
need
figure
retirement.
shit out.
You need more than Social Security. That's for goddamn sure.
Exactly. If that's even still around. I don't even understand that. That's another episode.
That should be another episode.
It should.
It's a good one.
But, this study also looked at how variable influences of stress and found that the odds of stress due to inflation were higher for females, transgender, anyone who has an income, this didn't make any sense to me, having an income below 400% of the federal poverty line. I don't understand how something could be more than 100%.
And I should know this as well. But we'll look into this.
I'm like,
see, I'm on the program side of workforce development. Thankfully, not the econ side. But
I play with feelings all day.
I play with children and people's emotions.
Numbers. Yeah. What's that from?
I don't know.
It's from something.
Probably Zoolander.
Okay. Numbers are weird. But having lost employment income, not being able to afford food, healthcare access, I won't say the name of the company, but I remember back during 2005 to 2010, they were always giving standard 3% raises. Yeah. And all of a sudden they're like, we can't do that anymore. Yeah. The end.
That's the power of the union, baby. You get your standard raises. You have, you pay to have people fight.
SEIU, I got a $1 raise within a month of working at my job.
We're
about this
SEIU. Yeah. 1021, baby.
So, and again, when I'm talking about stress, stress is, we've said this before in episodes, it's not a bad thing. Stress gives us a sort of force forward. We need a little bit of that. But I'm really talking about toxic stress and really burnout and people being so emotionally fried from the inside out, like from their neurons out. And coping has a window of tolerance, and there's sort of a range of what's considered adaptive versus maladaptive. Yeah. But, again, you and I understand that because of trauma, someone who's running might in this, capitalist economy look very like, oh, they're adapting well. Look how functional they are. Yeah. And you and I know that's actually not always the case. That's a trauma response. Right. And, again, it takes there's a luxury in being able to slow down. Yeah. I will say no one can take your micro moment away, and you can take a deep breath, but deep breaths aren't going to pay your mortgage.
That's right. Not going to put food on the table. That's for sure.
I'm not going to be that therapist who's like, well, let's just breathe.
Yeah.
And, let's just like not worry about it because that's a big thing.
I'd probably
and that
punch you in the face.
Oh, yeah, you would cut me. Yeah.
No, I don't believe in violence.
But stress absolutely kills. And we know that we just know from a million different research studies that it's going to have even a harder economic cost on healthcare, how we raise our children.
Yeah.
There's a trickle down in this burnout. But, so long story short, inflation can definitely be a major source of stress for people. Mm-hmm. Like you said, when prices go up, it impacts everything, not just from expenses, but also long-term planning. And it's really overwhelming. That's why I said it. A lot of this was like that fuck it mentality for me. I was like, well, I'll worry about that later.
Yeah.
And later always does come if you're lucky. Yeah. So here's some coping strategies that the internet thinks is helpful.
Okay.
That people use to manage stress associated with inflation. Now, I'm curious what you'll think, Jen. And just so you know, my rights are all in yellow. So
okay. Gotcha.
All right, so these are the ones I actually think kind of are okay. Okay.
Sure.
Budgeting and expense tracking.
Okay.
You got to know you got to write it down. You got to look at this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, don't be an ostrich with your head in the sand.
Right.
So I agree with that. Building an emergency fund.
You got to have the money to be able to do that.
I have not been able. Let me tell you, every time I've tried to make a financial cushion, my car broke.
Yep.
Or I got sick and didn't have health insurance or something fucked up happened.
It's true.
There's, or I ended up owing $30,000 in taxes that I didn't know was going to have to happen. These things. So I can barely make it paycheck to paycheck. Right. There is no emergency fund.
That's a privilege.
Bullshit. Exactly.
Yeah, that's for the privilege.
So, okay, this is another one. Seeking additional income. All right. So I do this. One might say that there was a time where possibly I worked in cash under the table, and sadly I made more doing that than I ever have.
Yeah.
Working and trying to do something that I believe my taxes contribute to society. And I believe this function, this is a function, but people are trying to freelance. I am a big fan of bartering where I'll say, I'll babysit your kid. Or I even just messaged a hairdresser and being like, look, you just had a baby. I would absolutely trade a couple hours of service to, if you would give me some, whatever.
Fuck yeah.
So, but again, that's really hard because then you live in fear of the government auditing you. And that's really scary. I do what I'm supposed to do. So it doesn't feel good.
Right.
This is another one I'm like, investing wisely.
Yeah. Well, you can seek additional income that is above board.
Yes.
But you're really telling people like get a second job.
I work 2 jobs right now.
Right. Like Joe Biden said, one job should be enough in this country.
It's not.
And it's not. And that's the problem for so many of us. It is not.
Yeah.
My mom, one of my moms was a housekeeper. Just that's all she did. Mm-hmm. And she was, we were poor, but my other mom cleaned houses on the side and waited tables. Mm. So, and that's backbreaking work.
Yes.
It's awful. So I hate that suggestion.
Yeah, I don't like that one either. And investing wisely, again, I was very lucky. My parents had invested early for me, and I've been working since I was 16, and they were very good about, no, you have to contribute a certain amount to 401. So I have that. But since 2014, I haven't been able to afford to invest in jack shit.
No.
So, and I don't understand what the fuck inflation is. You think I'm going to know what to do in the goddamn stock market?
And I don't trust the stock market.
No.
I'm not putting my money in that shit.
My money's in a weird space in my home.
My money is under
a tampon.
Yeah, my money's under my goddamn mattress where it's in a coffee can where it should be. We sound like hillbillies.
We do. So this is the other one I think is funny. Debt management.
Oh boy.
Well, all right. So poof, took a new job that I thought would be a better income-driven repayment plan. And just as you posted this week on our TikTok, that kind of got fucked up our asses, didn't it? We're in forbearance.
The save plan, is
can't make any, so we're trying to pay off. I feel super gaslit by the education system and all the experience and education that I have that I'm happy to use. I don't get reimbursed for.
Right.
And I'm doing it. I have to do it my way to make the money I make. But it's ridiculous jobs that are asking me to do something and paying me so little.
Yeah.
And again, that's the whole other story. But, I'm just like debt management. Like I'm trying. Yeah. You won't let me manage my debt.
Right.
These 3 I'm on board with. Adjusting lifestyle choices. So like I said, I made a choice to get rid of my car.
Yeah.
That is something I just that's the easiest way to deal with that. And it is yes, I do have to, there are times where it is unfortunate. I don't have a car and that sucks.
Yeah.
But again, these are other things that, I shop at grocery outlet.
And we also live in San Francisco. We have a robust transportation system, and your partner has a car.
Not a big deal.
Yeah.
Staying informed. That's why we're doing this episode.
Yeah.
You have to look at this stuff.
Right.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Practicing stress management techniques, again, doing things that don't cost you anything. Go for a walk.
Yeah.
Go outside if you can. But again, that's also contingent on having a space and a safe space to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I love this though, community and support networks. Anytime I have needed resources or support, I've certainly called you and asked, hey, where can I get this? And you've helped me figure that out. Or you've said, hey, look this up. There is stuff for you.
There are.
But it's less and less, and more people are needing it now.
Yes.
And people who are middle class, who never used to need that, are now needing it.
Right.
So there's less of it. So you have to find the right balance and the combination of these strategies that work for you.
Yeah.
But if you're not thinking about any of these things, you're probably pretty well off, and God bless you. And that you probably earn that money, and more power to you, but know that. And know that that's when you're voting or you're doing things, you have to, and we'll get to this later on, are you thinking about the collective or just yourself and what works best for you?
And most of us are one catastrophic illness away from financial ruin. And that's what happened to my mom.
Unhoused.
Yeah, totally. Most of us
there a statistic like it's like 3 paychecks away,
something like that. Yeah, and we'd be dependent on friends and family to take care of us. And
if you don't have a partner too, right? When I was single, that was a huge fear of mine. It's definitely softened now that I'm in a partnership where I know there's 2 incomes coming in. There's a different safety net. Yeah. But that when you're alone, that's scary.
It is. It absolutely is.
And
I get it.
Don't tell me that that's not having an impact on how our society functions and how productive people are able to be at their jobs.
And don't tell me by not having avocado toast at my local cafe that I'm going to be all right. Like everything's going to be okay if you just don't have that. That's millennials are just eating too much avocado toast.
I'm like, that was the thing.
No, bitch. It's because we can't buy homes anymore and wages aren't keeping up with inflation. We're fucked. Like, come on, dude. So here's the thing. Economists and pundits really continue to cite inflation as the reason why so many of us are grappling with financial pain. But as Carolyn and I have implied in both the title of this episode and our attitudes, many folks, including us, think corporate greed is at least partially to blame for the situation we're in. So let's start with NPR because we like NPR. So this is an article that we found. So the main suspects differ across party lines. Many economists and politicians on the right say inflation has been caused by government spending and various aid programs. Yeah, it's always us. Stimulus checks, student debt forgiveness, Biden in the White House with the public purse. Fuck y'all.
Bush did stimulus checks too, though.
For the rich. Oh, Trump did stimulus checks as well. And so, but when it's a Democrat, it's easy to point the finger. So, and the amount of corporate welfare that goes out during both Republican and Democratic administrations is staggering. So it's like, I think it was MLK who said it's, socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor. Yeah, pretty accurate. So, and many economists and politicians on the left point to the war in Ukraine, pushing oil prices up, which really bleeds into everything. Yeah. And also greedy companies, many of which, despite tales of supply chain snarls and rising costs, have been bringing in record profits. Corporate profits. Let's talk about those. They reached an all-time high this year. Many companies saw profits hit record highs. This naturally raises some eyebrows. If companies are struggling, if I could raise my eyebrows, I would. Actually, I can because I'm due for Botox.
I haven't been spending on Botox because I can't do it.
That is one expense I refuse to cut. God
That's
damn
how
it.
bad things have gotten, guys.
Ugh,
I sound like an asshole. I'm
dark
sorry.
times, man. So, if companies are struggling with costs and supply chains so much, where are all these billions of dollars in profits coming from? So Rakeen Mabad, he's a chief economist for the progressive think tank Groundwork Collaborative. And he said, companies are taking a spoonful of sugar off the backs of families who are really struggling to get by. I'm sorry, she said, excuse me. Mabud has sat in dozens of corporate earnings calls and says she often hears CEOs bragging about how much they were able to raise prices. Carolyn, did you know that there are only 4 companies in the U.S. that control about 80% of the beef and poultry market?
I do know that.
Yeah, and that's fucked up.
Yeah.
So it's called a monopoly, bro.
4. I thought it was 8.
It's worse than we thought.
Gross.
That kind of consolidation can mean companies don't have to compete as much for our business, and there's less pressure to keep prices low. So the University of Michigan economist Justin Wolfers said, my friend and economist Jason Furman says blaming inflation on greed is like blaming a plane crash on gravity, says Wolfers. It's technically correct, but it's entirely missing the point. So, they've got a little bit of an issue with just flat out blaming corporations. There's more factors at play, possibly. So Wolfers says that many companies have two expenses: raw materials, workers' wages. So raw materials have gotten a lot more expensive, as we saw. Wages, though, that's another story. So far this year, wages have risen about 5% compared to prices, which have risen 7.7%. Companies are not I cannot talk.
That's okay.
Raising wages as fast as they're raising prices. We know this. Wolfers thinks that the lag is where some of these corporate profits are coming from. Okay. As soon as companies start paying out more in wages, those record profits CEOs are bragging about will likely go into workers' paychecks. I call bullshit on that.
Yeah, I'm asking whose wages, too.
Yeah, exactly. No, these motherfuckers are still going to be making millions of dollars. Those people
fucking
at the
Logan
top.
Roy's.
Right, exactly. So what's happening in the interim is there's a bit of money that we might hope should go to workers, explains Wolfers, but is staying in the boss's pocket instead. Okay. In spite of inflation, demand hasn't really blinked. Companies have been raising prices and we have been paying them. In fact, in many parts of the economy, spending has been rising right along with prices. I have a bone to pick with that shit. Well, this may be applicable to goods that we don't quote unquote need. What about food? Like we have no choice. It's like most of us don't have we need to feed our families.
Yeah.
On the other
And
hand,
ourselves.
the consumer does have a lot of power. And so we can say, I'm not going to buy this incredibly expensive thing that I don't really need. But when it comes to food and it comes to gas, so we don't have a choice. Most of us don't have a choice.
Yes.
And so let's go back on this note to the Groundwork Collaborative article. Inflation is coming down, but families are still feeling the pinch at the checkout line, says Lindsay Owens, executive director of Groundwork Collaborative. Even as supply chain snarls have receded and the U.S. economy has stabilized, our research finds that businesses continue to pad the bottom lines at the expense of American families. So here are their key findings from this report. From April to September 2023, corporate profits drove 53% of inflation. Comparatively, over the 40 years prior to the pandemic, profits drove just 11% of price growth. While prices for consumers have risen by 3.4% over the past year, input costs for producers have risen just 1%. So saying production costs have gone up, and that's why we're raising our prices. Well, production costs have only gone up 1%, according to this. And the actual price that we're paying has gone up by 3.4%. So they're tripling it. They're tripling
fair.
it. So for many commodities, they are.
Lie.
I know. Don't trust them. So for many commodities and services, producers' prices have actually decreased. Corporations have failed to pass these savings on to consumers. So corporate profits are, as a share of national income, have skyrocketed by 29% since the start of the pandemic. While our economy has returned to or surpassed its pre-pandemic levels on many indicators, workers' share of corporate income is still not recovered. So my last point here. It's one thing for corporations to pass reasonable increased costs to consumers. It's another for them to line their coffers by exploiting Americans who are just trying to get by. This is what Liz Pancati, strategic advisor for Groundwork and co-author of the report, said. It's time to rein in corporate price gouging or families will continue to pay the price. So I know, and I know you, Carolyn, we would never choose to pad our pockets at the expense of American families being able to eat. But clearly there are a lot of CEOs and the shareholders that the CEOs are making decisions on behalf of who can justify this or simply don't give a fuck. Can you talk about kind of, if there's such a thing, corporate psychology?
I'll try. I think we have stepped beyond just basic organizational psychology and how, to me, with my degree in public administration and organizational development, how to structure a company. And what you're really asking me, I think, is more about the ethics and the morality.
Okay,
and
shake the table. It'll fuck up our sound.
I'm going to shake a lot.
We're getting angry. We're shaking the table, and I
lean on it because I'm like so like just
that's what I'm hearing when I go back and I listen to the recording. And I'm like, what is that sound? And it's like
it's me
us shaking our rickety ass table, getting all fucking excited. Please go on. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Okay, it's all right. So I think we're talking more about sort of ethics and morality and, really virtues.
Yeah.
Which, what is it? The Billy Madison, like when.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, Eric, I'll take, business ethics. He's like the worst ethics guy ever.
Couldn't answer anything.
Any of the questions. Yeah. Sorry. But, corporate ethics I think, I guess post-pandemic, but for me, it kind of feels like, that was such a big 1980s, like Reaganomics, like, just corporations and big business and, and you could even say like the dot-com burst and bubbles and things like that. But for me, like once the housing bubble did what it did, it changed everything. And at least in my lifetime.
For our generation.
And for our generation. Then again, post-pandemic America reflects a new level of how transparency and accountability are really sort of social imperatives that we require now in brands. Not everyone.
Yeah.
But I think more kind of what you would call kind of the conscious consumer who has the time to be a conscious consumer and the ability to do that. But depending on what political side of the street you reside and how, sustainable and ethical a company is from a social and global context, that matters to me. Yeah. For sure. That's where I put my money. I don't buy, Tyson or Foster Farms and things like that. So conscious consumerism is an ability to choose how you spend and where, you care. And also I think researching the supply chain practices and how companies take care of their workers as well, not just from a mental health standpoint, but from flexible work options, compensation. I'm much more likely to put my money and also invest in businesses of color and, where I want my money to go.
Totally.
And so these are all, considerations. Things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. We talked about that in our last episode. Fair labor practices. I think that should always be a thing.
Yeah, totally.
But
I ain't buying nothing from Temu. No. Let me tell you that much.
And fast fashion. And you and I have talked about this before, that I'm more likely to buy something if it's secondhand or and to the point where that's pretty much Patagonia. Predominantly where I get it. Yeah. And, I think that what's really driving this and what I find so interesting about it being so predominantly food-based is that there's such a, weird parallel with environmental sustainability and the food and meat and dairy. Yeah. And also the FDA. They're in bed together. Yeah, totally. So when it comes to, but these are all, I don't think we have a lot of time. And we've talked about this in other episodes. Yeah. But, the social responsibility, there's an increasing, at least an expectation for companies to play a more proactive role in addressing social issues and charitable initiatives and ethical sourcing and all the things that go into that. But also on the other side of that, there's so much information. How do you know that you're actually getting accurate information? I think we saw this with a lot of, I forget what the term was, but with like pride marketing. Oh, yeah. That you say that, but then, what's that? Like, people are looking what's behind the curtain. Yeah. I don't shop at Home Depot. Right. Not like I don't know, and again, I can only do what I can do. Yeah. And say, well, if I'm going to buy corporate, at least I would much prefer to go to the local hardware store. Yeah. But it's higher price, but at least it's going towards something. But, so I think when it comes also to ethical leadership, we're also kind of questioning, is that possible in a capitalist economy? It is. To balance profit and principle. And the role of leadership in setting and modeling ethical behavior it should always be critical. Yeah. But it's so much more critical. And leaders are absolutely, I think that goes across the board. Politicians, we hold even people in entertainment accountable to these these moral codes that we have for everyone, right? But these are how we want to demonstrate integrity and decision making and reflect the company's values and ethical standards. And CEOs have to model that behavior.
Yeah.
In the sense of they're demonstrating honesty, they're demonstrating transparency, fairness, and then saying, okay, this has to be the walk the talk. We can't just say that.
Yeah.
We actually have to do. And we live in a really interesting time where you can establish a code of ethics. And I think you and I have certainly worked in organizations that say they have that. Yeah. But they don't fucking
We're
do
so
it.
trauma informed. No, bitch, you're traumatizing me.
Exactly. And so I think the more interesting thing to me is this culture of transparency that we're dealing with because of what technology has given us.
Right.
And, we want open communication. We want transparency. But, again, it's really frightening now where, well, what do I trust and what don't I trust? And it takes time. And if Walmart's the only thing I have,
right.
what am I supposed to do?
And if they have the cheapest prices for food and I'm pinching my pennies like my mom in Denver, I don't begrudge her going to Walmart in spite of her being a lifelong union member. Like she hates that she has to do it, but it's a fucking necessity.
Exactly. And so it makes it really difficult when what's kind of change is bad. I think change can be seen as bad for those that profit and benefit from there not being change. I think you and I see the world from a different lens that I think you can actually we need to impart changes and profit from them. I think you could do both.
Yeah, you can.
I think that there can be ways that, and you see this with a lot of companies that are offering sustainability, and that's actually their platform.
Look at Patagonia.
Look at what we're doing.
Yeah.
And here's how we're doing it.
Right.
And then the consumer goes, well, that's where then I'm going to put my money.
Absolutely.
Their stuff is so fucking crazy expensive.
Well, that's the thing too. It's a lot of these ethical companies.
I buy a lot of it on Poshmark.
Yeah, dude, I buy it used. I have to because it's expensive. But there's also a company, and I can't remember the name of the company, but I think it's out of Seattle. This guy started a company and he was like, you know what? I'm going to make sure that all of my employees make a minimum of $70,000 a year. And he was paying them well. And people were like, your company is going to fail. They did great. They're doing great. Yeah. I can't remember how much he was paying himself, but it was along the same lines. He was not paying himself any more or that much more than his employees. Yeah. And they're fucking killing it. And Patagonia, which we mentioned, fucking killing it.
Well, it reminds me of Pretty Woman where she's like, I got money to spend. And people, again, this is where the rich can be valuable.
Yeah.
I'm going to work into their belief system that they don't want to feel bad and guilty. Right. So they are going to put their money towards more ethical companies.
You'd hope.
that are really virtue. I don't even want to say ethical, virtue based. Yeah. And people have money to spend. Yeah. There are people who have money to spend. Yeah. Let the companies that are valuing that rise to the top. Let the other ones go fuck themselves.
That's why I like my boy Ian Somerhalder and his wife Nikki Reed, because they have money, obviously. They're millionaires. They both acted. Yeah. But they like, you look at what they're doing. Yeah. They live on a farm. They're like getting their own crops. And granted, there's a lot of privilege inherent in this. And the vacations they take, they're going to like fucking sustainable villages in Switzerland or whatever. Like they are choosing to spend their money in ways that are not a degradation for the environment. They care about sustainability. They care about regenerative soil practices, which are better for all of us in combating climate change. I'm like, you know what? When I'm a millionaire, this is how I'm going to live.
Well, we're looking at a time where I think people are going to look back on this and go, how could people have done that to the planet?
I hope if there are even people to look back.
Yeah, right. How could people do that to animals? Yeah. And it, again, I love meat. Yeah. But it's expensive. And I don't, unless, like to your point, unless I know where it's coming from or I can get it sourced well, I don't eat it. I don't need it.
Well, was it Einstein?
And vegetables.
Totally.
And, right? So go ahead.
Oh, Einstein. No. I was just going to say, I think Einstein was the one who said, you can tell how evolved a society is by the way it treats its animals. I think it was, I can't remember if it was Einstein, but one of those geniuses. Yeah. Anyway, it sounds like you took my question to a place of not what's wrong with these corporate CEOs who are making these decisions, but rather what we as the consumer can do as a reaction to.
I think that's all we can do. Yeah. Because that's activism in action.
Sure.
Right?
That's more valuable, I think, than trying to understand, psychologically speaking, what compels people to be so greedy that they don't give a shit if a family can eat.
I think there's always going to be the majority there's going to be the anti and the pro, and then you have a large majority who just doesn't give a shit.
Right.
Or doesn't know any better. Or doesn't go to care. And it's that meshing of, again, I think people, we've talked about industrial sociopathy.
Yes.
Nothing happens to them if they do anything.
Yeah.
And I'm really angry about that, because that's when I talk about kind of the parental government that I want, of sort of being there to hold some sort of legal accountability and justice. Why would you?
Yeah.
Fucking, why would anyone? And then you see that trickle down in kids. Why would any kid feel like they have to not use violence when Will Smith goes and slaps someone and nothing happens to him?
Right. Nope.
And now you're going to tell me that unfortunately, that's how people think.
There are different rules for the rich.
There are different rules, and people look to that and they go, oh, well.
Yeah. Yep. Well, they'll find out real quick if they behave that way and they aren't wealthy, that they ain't going to be treated the same way as Will Smith, and the CEO gets a fucking golden parachute when he fucks up and costs people money and jobs.
But nothing happens to them.
Nothing happens to them.
Exactly. And that, like, you talk about the two of us getting so angry, that makes me so mad in a place that I didn't even know. Like, it makes me violently angry.
Well, it offends your sense of justice.
Fair.
Yeah.
That's not how I was raised to behave. And that's certainly not how I run my business. And that's the first question I ask people. I go, this is pricey.
You're shaking the table again. I'm so angry about it.
Pricey. This is pricey. I don't want you to have to choose between your mental health and buying groceries.
Yeah.
How are you going to be? How committed are you? How are you going to be affording this? Are you aware of all the other things you can be doing so that this impacts you the best?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And, I just want to it is fucked up. We just want to make one last point here, because we've been prattling on for the last 45 minutes. Rage. Our socialist rage is going to come to an end soon. But before it does, I really want to talk about some sick shit that I was really first made aware of thanks to our Lord and Savior, Jon Stewart. So, he had a segment where they were talking about the answer to inflation being more unemployment. So my ears immediately perk up as somebody who works in workforce development. I'm like, what do you say? Carolyn, have you ever heard of something called the Phillips curve?
Sounds kinky.
It's not. It's really boring.
Never heard of it.
Fortunately, economists are kind of starting to push back, but there are still far too many who adhere to this almost 200-year-old principle. So, A.W. Phillips was the first economist to present compelling evidence of the inverse relationship between unemployment and wage inflation. Okay, so Phillips hypothesized that when demand for labor is high, there are few unemployed workers. Employers can be expected to bid wages up quite rapidly. However, when demand for labor is low and unemployment is high, workers are reluctant to accept lower wages than the prevailing rate. And as a result, wages fall very slowly. Okay. So since wages and salaries are major input costs for companies, rising wages should lead to higher prices for products and services in the economy, ultimately pushing the overall inflation rate higher. As a result, Phillips graphed the relationship between general price inflation and unemployment rather than wage inflation. So this graph is called the Phillips curve. So basically, essentially, it's like, okay, if you have more unemployment, the cost of things is supposed to go down. If you have higher employment, the cost of things goes up, which to me seems, both seem fucked.
Yeah.
But the latter seems particularly unfair. It's like, great, I got a job, I got a small raise. Oh, everything's going up in price.
Yeah, that doesn't work now.
Yeah. Actually, and then if fewer people are working, there's fewer people spending money. And so there's more competition to get the scarce resources that are out there from people who are spending money. And so inflation goes down. I think that's what it is. So I have another bone to pick with this shit. And again, this is why we can't get ahead. All right, I just talked about this. So cool. I got a $500 raise, but I'm going to see very little of it because everything now costs more and is going up disproportionate to wage growth.
Yep.
That's the problem. Goods and services always go up a lot faster than fucking wages. Yeah. This is why we cannot get ahead. So here's a counter argument from NPR. For the past several decades, an economic rule of thumb has been that lowering the inflation rate leads to higher unemployment. But that correlation has been weakening lately. Yes. Even as unemployment took some wild swings, inflation didn't budge until recently. And now as inflation has been coming down, unemployment has remained relatively low, which to me is good news. Mm-hmm. But for economists, it also means their understanding of inflation is experiencing some growing pains. fuck you, Phillips curve. So the reason it's terrifying is that if you lose the Phillips curve, you don't quite know what to do to bring inflation down. And so I'm sorry, but I have a real issue with a system that encourages unemployment as a strategy for fixing anything.
When did that ever work?
Well, according to this guy, there was a relationship between the two.
Maybe it's time we change that.
There's something wrong with the system, even if this is correct, that requires a higher rate of unemployment to bring down inflation.
Right.
That is a flawed system.
Yeah.
So it's shockingly clear to me that our economic system, like I said, that MLK said is socialism for the rich and rugged rugged individualism for the poor. It's fucked up, and the system isn't broken. Unfortunately, it is working exactly as it was designed to work, and it doesn't work for most of us.
No.
So, this is where we're at right now. I don't understand why so many of us necessarily are inclined to accept a system that works for so few of us. Are we that lulled to sleep by TV and the small things that we do have to where we're like, everything's cool?
Maybe. I don't think we are anymore, though. I think people are
waking up.
I think the current political election is really forcing that. I want to highlight a book about, it's called Right Thing Right Now by Ryan Holiday. We talked a lot about personal standards and discipline in your virtues, kind of starting from the inside out, asking of yourself to have some standards and some virtues, then asking or having a collective. Well, I'm going to put my money in this is from Ryan Holiday, put my money in organization structures, leaderships, goods and services that also align with my values. Then I'm going to pressure systemic powers and businesses and make them do things different. Yeah. They're not just going to do it because it's out of the goodness of their heart.
That's how laws are made, right? It's not because these legislators are like, integration is great. It's people fighting and dying in the streets.
It's activism. And like you said, it's, the activism has to appeal to self-interest. Yeah. And Ryan talks about how you can't shame people into change, especially when you need them to change their behaviors. And activism that actually looks at changing belief systems, and different people get persuaded by different things. Yeah. So, again, the transparency, but at the same time, like I said, there's people who are really anti, there's people that are really pro. You and I are sitting here going, well, we're all really pro. What's going on? Well, on the other side of that, there's people who are really anti. Yeah. I believe that, and I it's not even a belief system. I know it's because they're being educationally suppressed and brainwashed.
Right. That's right.
We're not just talking about a way of politics. We're talking about a cult mentality. Oh, yeah. That is breeding mistrust in information.
Thanks, Fox.
Putting mistrusting information. Yeah. So again, individuals, and I think at the end of the day, our founding fathers set up a system that put a lot of rights for the individuals. But
it's not a collectivist society, unfortunately.
The problem with that is when you're only thinking about yourself, you're not thinking about the collective. And if we live in Viktor Frankl is very famous for saying we have a statue of liberty, but what we really also need next to that is a statue of responsibility.
I love that.
And that you can't just act in, if we all live in a society where we only act in our self-interest, it's going to fall apart.
Absolutely.
And that's where we are right now.
Yeah.
And that's where that fuck it. And that's why the majority, the middle part, it's not these two ends of the spectrum. It's, it's that middle part that has to actually see how this impacts them and how this affects them in order for us to actually impart change and, again, really be able to not go beyond critically thinking and be wise with what am I reading? Who's benefiting from that? Yeah. And, it's like Harvey Milk made all these changes because he worked with the Teamsters, right? Very unlikely.
Did he work with the Teamsters?
In the 1950s, he worked with the Teamsters and said, if I can get you these, I think it was something about the getting beer. And he said, I will set you up with all these businesses in the Castro. They will only buy from you. Yeah. But you got to put gay workers in your system.
I like that.
And, people have to know this stuff. So sometimes you have to work with
I didn't know this, and I work with the Teamsters.
I learned this from reading Ryan Holiday's book. He also talked about someone named Thomas Clarkson. Have you heard of him?
No.
You probably have. Did you ever see that visual of the slave trade boats?
Yes.
He created that visual.
I see.
So he was in England and was saying to all these people in England where slavery was outlawed, look what you're benefiting from.
Yeah.
This is where your money's come from. You have to put a picture. That appeals to most people.
Right.
Whether it's environmental, whether it's...
We're simple. Can show me a goddamn picture.
Because I think, and this is what I loved about Ryan's book, and he's a Stoic, but most people I think are good. And if they really see how awful something is, like nothing like watching, looking at how your food is made to make you go, ooh, maybe I won't eat beef for a little while. Or maybe I'll buy that from someone a little differently where I can trust. You can't go in certain places because you can't see what's going on.
Right.
So we have to wake up and know that the stress that we're in is because we are, I think, calculatedly being overwhelmed.
Oh, sure.
And overstimulated.
Oh, yeah, it's deliberate. It is a deliberate tactic. Now, our final...
Sorry.
We threw a lot at you. I know. Be discerning in where you get your news. Be discerning when it comes to how much news you take in. Be aware of the 24-hour news cycle and how toxic it can be, whether or not you're watching CNN or MSNBC or Fox. Like, it is overwhelming. And I think the 24-hour news cycle has really contributed to where we're at right now.
Down.
Yeah. Yep. And
They're dissociated.
They really are. And so, our final thought on this really is we really don't think you need to be an economist to understand that our economic system is inequitable and an unsustainable mess. So while corporations may not be entirely to blame for inflation, they sure don't seem to have a problem increasing prices far beyond the point necessary to cover things like increases in production costs, materials, and wages. These windfall profits are not trickling down to the workers as Reaganomics would suggest. Trickle down is a largely discredited theory that tries to justify the rich taking theirs first and how allowing this process to flourish will benefit those of us at the bottom. It's bullshit. And while we fight for the true causes of inflation, hardworking American families are suffering and struggling to make ends meet. Inflation or no inflation, we need to work to dismantle this inequitable system that seems to be primarily benefiting the haves while the rest of us literally go fucking hungry. So just be discerning. Ask questions. Wonder why you're paying more at the pump. Wonder why your groceries are so expensive. Start asking about monopolies. Start asking about these corporations and their profits and why you're struggling and they're killing it. These are important questions, and we hope we've stimulated your minds.
I'm stimulated.
Yeah, you are. We'll see
My
how
cheeks are so red right now.
I
So
know.
hot.
It might be the wine, and it might be the humidity because I don't know why San Francisco's real hot right now.
September summer.
It is. It's our late summer.
Dresses and shorts.
It's pretty amazing. But I'm ready for fall. Anyway, we will see y'all next week. I don't know yet what we're going to be talking about, but I assure you it's going to be interesting. We'll probably be angry about some fucking thing. And in the interim, you can follow us on TikTok at twatjc. And if you click on our profile, you can get to YouTube. And from YouTube, you can get to Apple and Spotify. We try to make it fucking easy.
Yeah.
So follow us, listen to us, all that good shit. You have yourselves a good Labor Day weekend. Oh, the weekend brought to you by unions. That's right, bitches. Enjoy.
Bye.